Programmes and Resources Committee on Friday the 24th of January. This meeting's been moved to slightly later in the morning than it was originally scheduled because of an extraordinary authority meeting. If we could go straight into the agenda, please. We have apologies from absence from Andrew Gregory, Andy Nash, Becky Woods, Jill Heath and Charlotte Farrell. I don't think we've received any others. And before we move on, as mentioned at the authority meeting, I'd like to welcome our boardroom apprentice, Mandy Martin, who, as well as sitting on authority meetings, will also be sitting on Programmes and Resources Committee meetings. So welcome, Mandy, and hope you have fun. If we could move on to item number 2, which is the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 6th of December. Are there any amendments or deletions or anything in those minutes? Ken?
Yeah, not really an amendment, but just something, an interesting point about the research laboratory of Featherbed Law. Well, there was a misconception as to where it was.
Right.
There's 2 places with the same name, but we've now...
Okay.
So, just for clarification, it's on the one immediately adjacent to the Snake Pass, not the one further over here.
Yeah, thank you. I think Matt, when he was describing it to us and discussing it, he said one of the attractions of it was its proximity to the Snake Pass to enable visits there. So thank you for that information. Yeah, but thank you. But I don't think I don't think we need to amend the minutes for that information. But thank you. Any other amendments or issues with the minutes? In which case, can I ask first, thank you, anticipated moving the recommendation, Charles, thank you very much. Anyone able to second the recommendation to approve the minutes? Thank you, James Beresford. All in favour of approving the minutes? Anyone against approving the minutes? Anyone abstaining from approving? Oh, they're approved. Right. We have no urgent business, not for this committee anyway. There's lots of urgent business going on, but not on the agenda today or on the remit of this committee. We have no public participation that I'm aware of. Do we have any member declarations of interest for any of the items today? Okay, thank you. So if we could move into item 6. We're racing through. I think it will slow down a little bit now. Item 6 is the review of the safeguarding policy, and I'm going to ask Natalie Webster to briefly introduce this item for us. And Natalie, I think because you've not seen this committee before, could you introduce yourself to us as well, please?
Yep, I'll do that. So I'm Natalie Webster. I'm one of the 3 HR advisors working in the people management team. So I'm here on behalf of Teresa, who's not working today. So just to introduce this, so this is coming to Programmes and Resources Committee following some training that Teresa went on as part of her role as a designated safeguarding officer. That training highlighted that we don't have any member scrutiny of safeguarding at the moment. So we have the policy in place and guidance behind that, but it doesn't go to any member meeting. So this short report relates to a review of our safeguarding policy, and the intention is that we'll align with occupational safety and health and bring a report in April which gives more detail about our approach to safeguarding, the measures that we have in place, the mechanisms for checking that we're doing everything properly, and the training provision that we have. But that this report is just about an update to the policy that we've got. So there are only some minor changes to the policy being proposed, and they're given at 2.5. So clarity on the scope of the policy. So there was actually no scope of who was covered by this policy in the previous version. So we needed to get that in there. About our commitments, so we've just shortened those, made them more succinct. We haven't removed anything, we've just, like I say, made them more succinct. And we've categorised the responsibilities so that everybody, members, staff, managers, know what is their responsibility. And then we've just updated the legislation at the back, following some new legislation that came in 2024.
Thank you, Natalie. Can I open it up to members for questions and comments, please? Chris, and then Simon.
Thank you. I just wonder where volunteers fit in this, because I can't see the word volunteer mentioned. Or maybe I've missed it.
So they are included in the scope of the policy. It's members, employees, casual workers, volunteers, and it goes on to include all the other groups. So anybody working basically on behalf of the authority.
So where does it... where in the
Sorry,
policy is
at
it?
point 3 in the policy.
Yes, thank you. Simon.
Exactly the same point. I still think it's a bit ambiguous because it talks about the staff and workforce in a number of the individual clauses, but doesn't refer to volunteers. So you might just want to make it a defined term.
Okay, I'll take that back to Teresa to look at.
Thank you. So it's a little bit more clarity of definition as to who's covered in it. Thank you. Any other... Ken?
So I'm assuming that these people are sort of like DBS checked, the working with children.
So we do check anybody. There are categories. We have a risk assessment to go through to determine whether or not we should do a DBS check on somebody, because it's worth remembering that it's also in the legislation that we shouldn't check somebody unless it's necessary. So we do have a risk assessment that we go through on posts and any new posts that determine whether or not we need to do a DBS check, and we do them where needed.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Thank you. If there aren't, would somebody like to move the recommendations? Thank you, Charles. Anyone care to say? Ken R. Everybody in favour of this these recommendations? Thank you very much. Anyone against? Anyone abstaining? Thank you very much for that. We will be seeing this on an annual basis when there's updates, and we will be receiving statistics as well. One thing we discussed outside in the pre-meeting was also the importance of member training in safeguarding, and it's something that we'll be looking at in the spring. We know that many, particularly local council members, will have had safeguarding training through their own organisations, and others of us have, but there may be some people who haven't, and I think it's good practice for everybody to get that training. Thank you very much for that, Natalie. As you're here, can we move on to item number 7, please, which is the review of the occupational safety and health policy. So over to you for an introduction again.
Yeah, it's a very short introduction. Again, it's a short report that's seeking approval of some minor changes to the occupational safety and health policy. Those changes are just so that the policy is clearer on management responsibilities as part of our incident reporting arrangements, and a change to the name of our Health and Safety Committee, which is now Health, Safety and Wellbeing Committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Natalie. And as I said, this is a very minor revision to the policy, but it's because it's a policy revision, it needs to come to programmes and resources. And we do see safety and health statistics, we'll see those in April, but this is just for the policy. Any comments and questions from members? Okay, right, good. Would anybody like to move the recommendations? Thank you, to approve this. Thank you, James. Anyone like to second it? Thank you, Charles. All in favour? Thank you. Anyone against? Anyone abstaining? Thank you. That's unanimous. Thank you. Right, if we can move on to item number 8, which is the discussion item for today. And just to remind members of the Programmes and Resources Committee, and for the benefit of our boardroom apprentice, the terms of reference for this committee are for approval and decision making in some areas, but it's also used for us as a subcommittee of the authority to understand in more depth progress and the detail behind how the aims of the management plan are being delivered. And we have 4 of those aims, and the one we're considering today is the sustainable and thriving communities. And so there's no decisions to be made on this, but members have given feedback, and certainly the officers also find it useful for us as members to reflect on where progress is being made, any barriers to progress, and also for us as members to be able to provide a supportive environment for discussion on the aims. So I'm going to hand over to Brian Taylor as Head of Planning to introduce the theme update, and then we'll take forward a discussion. Over to you, Brian.
Thanks, Janet. Right, let's see if this will work for me.
Am I in the way here? Are you going to be using that?
So, thanks, Chair. We've got some Thriving Communities update. These are the two main objectives in the management plan related to these. So one about supporting sustainable communities by improving opportunities for affordable housing and the connection to services, so very much about the village environment. And then another about promoting a flourishing economy for the National Park, but connecting that to our aims for nature recovery and climate change, so that we've got an appropriate kind of scale and range of businesses in the park. Okay. So in the report, there's a series of headings for updates, and they cover these areas. So I'm just going to give you a couple of slides each for these kind of areas, just to give you some context on what we're doing over the last period. The last report that I took was in April last year, so covers that sort of half-yearish sort of period. So in affordable housing, one of the key issues has been around the review of the local plan. So we put this document out, just consulted for an 8-week period up to the end of November, and that covers all of the main issues and options for policy, reviewing the current set of policies we've got in our core strategy and development management policies, and obviously affordable housing is a key one. So there's issues in there about where we're looking to roll out affordable housing, which are the primary villages for that, the whole kind of debate about housing sites and the relationship to special green spaces in our villages, and then the actual specifics of the houses themselves and who they're for, the kind of size of them, how we keep them affordable, and who are they for, the occupancy of them. So lots of questions coming through that. I'd say a little bit more about the local plan review on another slide. Very big issues nationally around national policy, the NPPF, National Planning Policy Framework, and some changes in there. Big news about changes to the green belt and the edges of urban areas, the grey belt as they're calling it, and how that might impact on housing delivery. For national parks, that can involve the setting of our areas, so the edges of places like Sheffield, Leek, Chesterfield, all those areas, there'll be pressure to expand out into the country, so issues there. But the big one really is this methodology for how local planning authorities are calculating housing need and then their targets for their plans. And that is having a big impact on the numbers, the annual expected targets in the district area, so I'll show you a bit more about that. At a very site-specific level, we want to try and progress sites that either have planning permission or that are getting to that stage, and there's various issues that we have to get involved in, which I'll tell you about. And also ongoing work with Derbyshire Dales at a member level, so we have a joint housing group now across the membership to try and understand these issues. So that's ongoing at the minute, getting our heads around what these changes mean for us locally. On the change to the NPPF, this is a table which may be a bit small, but I'll point to some colours rather than numbers, then it might be a bit easier. So across the whole country, the change to the standard method for calculating housing need has had a big uplift. The manifesto for the Labour government said we want to build 1.5 million more homes within this parliamentary period, this next 5-year period, as an uplift additional to what we're already doing. So this is just the East Midlands Council's snapshot. And you start to see the impact in local district areas, rural district areas. If the two kind of columns coloured on the right there, the pink column is showing you the difference, the uplift. And the green ones in amongst the purple, if you kind of direct it back, you'll see one relates to Charnwood, but actually after that you've got Derby, Leicester and Nottingham, all with decreases to their housing numbers. All the others are showing big increases. So what's causing that? And it's changes to the way that what was previously described as an urban uplift used to be taken into account, brownfield land and a focus on urban areas, that's been removed. At the same time, you've got a big increase in the focus on affordable housing in rural areas. So the impact of that is really stark. You know, and for places like Derbyshire Dales, you've got a figure that's going from, it says 222 in this grey column on the left, up to now 580. So more than double, you know, at an annual scale. Huge challenge for our working group. What does it mean for us when you've got an area of a district partially overtaken by and overlapping with a national park? What does that mean for those figures? So that's the starting point. Work has to then be done about capacity and realities of delivery, what can actually be done in a place. But that's going to cause some real headaches right across the country. There was a lot of pushback, as you can imagine, across the country as to how this could actually be delivered. And we have a few areas in here. There's High Peak as well, 362 up to 553. So yeah, similar kind of big increases. Obviously High Peak has more of an urban context to it. Does have a big focus on brownfield. Derbyshire Dales is very much like us. You know, it's a village environment with a couple of market towns. So big pressures there that we're going to have to work through. The unblocking of sites is an example. We've got 3 mentioned in the report. One is, I think, the Hartington site, largely being built out, the former creamery site. There's some affordables there to bring forward. And we're trying to get our heads around, with Angela's legal team, the valuation of those properties to make them as affordable as possible to local people. The developer is pushing against that and trying to put in more value on those properties. So there's a big push for us to use the district valuer to get the right value and actually create something that is actually accessible to local people. So that's one. Tideswell is a scheme that we were approaching, bringing to planning committee in 2021, would you believe, change rules on nutrient neutrality, which in itself is a good thing. We don't want to see wastewater heading into our water systems, but no solutions about how we unblock that, how we actually create solutions to that problem to allow those planning permissions to progress. So it's just an example in the national park, and this is kind of just artist visualisations of what could happen. Actually, we were quite positive approaching that scheme from a planning perspective. We would have been recommended approval, but it hasn't actually been able to come forward. We haven't been able to find a solution. What we're doing there is actually trying to link that now to what's going on with nature recovery. We're actually seeing if there's bodies out there that can create nature conservation management plans that could potentially offset the harm there and find a way that we can allow that to progress. That's another one. There's another one mentioned about Bakewell. We're just trying to get our heads around the legal agreements for that. So you start to get to the specifics of how we can unblock these issues. Collectively, that's about 70 houses for the National Park with just those 3 sites. Sustainable travel. We've obviously got our sustainable travel framework that's progressed, but this is an extra piece that's been very active in the last period around active travel. So all national parks have been given £1 million across all the parks, so we get 100,000 each to try and progress this concept of active travel. So walking, cycling, wheeling, horse riding, all those areas. And we're trying to create, through some consultation, what we think to be our network plan for active travel. So that would include the key cycling network that already exists through the county, our trails, fantastic range of trails, Sustrans routes, and I'd map that and say that's the starter for us of a great active travel plan for the Peak District, and then consult on that. So we're just about to go out to consultation. The image on the right is what we did back end of last year. So we've already talked to the highways authorities, landowners, the local access forum, and get their views, and so we're trying to just draw that up now, and we'll consult the public on that. And that will give us a basis to then actually go forward and hopefully put more bids in and funding to actually enhance those routes and go further with that. So we've got great ambitions for that. Some examples: completing the White Peak Loop, for instance. That would be one, enhancing the trail. And the other one is looking at routes like the Transpennine Trail, which actually crosses the A628 closed today because of the wind, but actually there's difficulties in crossing a major route there, so actually looking at ways that we can enhance that and give people better route options. So those would be kind of examples included. Digital rollout, so within the period, real focus with the staff Jamorlands area, so just like that. Who's that? Will it just finish? Yeah. So, an interesting, through the link we've got with the district councils, their economic development role, and the counties, it starts to get you into the pre-application type discussions that are needed to roll these things out. So through Staffordshire, we've been linked up to this group called Atlas, which is a kind of independent group that tries to work with councils to deliver these infrastructure solutions. And they've already come to us and said we want to deliver quite a big mast in the Manifold area. And the way they work is to try and get more viability for these schemes by linking visitor use with community use. If they'd just gone on the needs of Wetton and Grindon, say, it wouldn't have been viable. But if they start to include the users of the Manifold Trail, they can start to build up a bigger scheme. But obviously that puts it into quite sensitive areas. So we have to start thinking early about what's also viable but also possible in the national park. And it's, you know, we're talking about this kind of landscape. We're talking about Thor's Cave, the Manifold, Grindon and Wetton, you know, character areas where scale and urbanisation have a big impact. So finding solutions, maybe a bit smaller or in a less harmful place, could work for us. So that's the start of our discussion there. But it's live, you know, that is happening. Local plan I mentioned, just some scale and figures. About 226 actual responders into the online process. But that generates a lot of separate comments, you know, across all the topics. 2,743 individual comments. The team are now going through one by one and adding a column that's about, well, what do we think about that officer review? And also, you know, we, for the first time in several years, because of lockdown and other things, able to get out into the communities. So 10 village events, 178 more people attended there. So that's face-to-face understanding of that document. And talking it through at the village level. So that was pretty positive, and I think we've got a basis to then talk through with the member group about where we go with those issue ideas. We've got to commission a bit more evidence. One is to kind of get our heads around the housing need question, but also things like green infrastructure, and really being clear on what we mean about our position on the rural economy, and making sure that sites can be viable enough to deliver affordable housing. So we don't have targets and we don't have strict percentages for delivering affordable housing contributions. But then you get into this whole debate about, is it viable? And quite often the developers will say, sorry, it's too expensive, can't afford to deliver any affordable homes, so you'll just have to get what we give you. But actually you can push back on that if you've got a strong planned position that's already thought about the viability in your area. So I think we're going to try and be stronger with that area in future with some new evidence. So once we've gone through all that, we've already had a project setting meeting with the member steering group, and we're thinking about what we'll do through the next year and to work towards our preferred plan. So we'll be writing that this year. Wider community support, and it is, we are under strain with this, so this is the wider things we do to try and work with communities and support them. Obviously under pressure because of resourcing and because of the focus on the local plan. There's still quite a lot happening. You see some neighbourhood plans that we're supporting. There's mention in there of the regulations, and it is a bit techie, but Reg 14 and Reg 15 are basically, Reg 14, the work that communities have to do up to the point of creating the plan and submitting it. They have to consult on that. And then they pass it to the local authority, and we have to test whether it's met the basic conditions before it can go to examination. So Saddleworth, for instance, at the minute, are looking at their plan and looking at whether they've met the basic tests. They've just done a consultation. They have to write a consultation statement, and that becomes one of those documents that we check. So we're involved with about 4 plans at the minute. Hartington is probably the only one at the minute that's completely within the national park. Many of them start to straddle areas, but Hartington will be feasible. Some small grants mentioned, the way we roll those out. Then I've put some evaluation feedback about some of the big events that we've been doing. like the annual Parishes Day and the numbers coming to that and the evaluation that we get. And it's useful to see because we ask not just how's the day gone, but how are we doing generally? How do people, what's the perception of our planning service and what do people think about the engagement they've got with us as an authority? And there's some quite useful things, pointers in there about how that's starting to improve for us. We also have an ambition to update something called parish statements. So that's a kind of little document for every single parish that sets some data out about census, population change, services. I like to try and keep that up to date as well. And we work with the RD, the rural development bodies across the area. So as our resource has shrunk, you know, we do very much work with people like Rural Action Derbyshire, the Council for Voluntary Services, because they're the ones really rolling out these rural development projects, things like Wheels to Work, getting people, young people into work and that kind of thing. But they're also working with the Shared Prosperity Fund, which is one of the other projects I'll mention. So that's one of the big economic development schemes in the area, and they're all around the table. We sit with them and the district councils, and it does start to draw out some of these wider issues like digital rollout, and we start to get links with people through these groups. So it's good to be part of. Just some figures there. That was the numbers that attended Parishes Day. I just split it out, majority from Derbyshire, but there was some spread from the other districts. And then just a couple of weeks ago in this room, we held specific planning training, a bit like we do for the members, but for parish councillors. We actually had more interest for that than we did for the Parishes Day, but it might not be surprising because everybody likes to be involved in planning. But 40 councillors came to that, and I put some of the villages down that came to that. And that went down very well. There's a lot of discussion about enforcement in that, and we might have a follow-up as a result. But that was good, it was positive, and it's showing that people are interested in how they can get a better representation made when they're doing their own discussions in the villages. How do they focus on material considerations? How do they frame it so that it's the strongest possible comment for them? So that seemed helpful. And I've just put it, obviously in the appendix, an example of the kind of things. Hopefully more is on the left-hand side of improving. There's one or two interesting comments you always get, but hopefully improving. From an economic point of view, a few things. Obviously the planning process, we're guiding and directing, advising development all the time, you know, and there's some examples just here. The business space is being developed out on the riverside in Bakewell. You know, we've got one of the former banks just been approved in Bakewell for a new restaurant. That draws in our heritage team advice, so it's just quite, you know, good the way that we wanted to reflect the multiple benefits that we start to get from some of these applications. Another pub reopened in Ashford this year, the Ashford Arms. We're also trying to protect some of our employment space. We had a pressure to change the use of one of our business spaces to a hotel on the other side of Bakewell, so that's how we kind of use planning control to try and defend business space. And then obviously we showed, I think earlier in the year, we had the commendation for the Bradwell site, which also includes business space. It wasn't just housing, but it was local economic space as well. Shared Prosperity Fund, I mentioned, I put a couple of maps in the appendices just to show you where those grants are rolling out to. And I've got, I think, I can't remember if I included it. I've got another slide I'll show you again in a minute. But yeah, that's really positive about how the National Park is benefiting from those grants, not just going to Matlock and Ashbourne and other areas outside, but the communities within. We host Business Peak District, so once a quarter we come into this room. I represent the park for that as well. There's a new, what they call a Concordat, sort of signing up of our joint objectives for business. And again, it's about how they recognise this landscape and work at the right scale for business in the area. It's challenging as well. They obviously want more space, they want growth, and we can talk about those things. And they held a kind of networking night just before Christmas. It was really buzzing in this room. So it's good that we can be part of that. Obviously the evidence I've mentioned for the local plan, and obviously things like farming and protected landscapes, you know, really significant to the agricultural economy, the way that we can use those grants and shape farm diversification and get more sustainability that way. I mentioned before the kind of things that the Shared Prosperity Fund can support, physical improvements, IT, marketing, productivity, climate adaptations as well. And that was just some of the maps. The left-hand side was the business grants, and if you just see the faint yellow outline is the national park. So you'll see a kind of cluster just outside around the Matlock area and around Ashbourne. But then inside, right up through the national park, that's just the Derbyshire Dales area. A lot of grants being given for business there. On the other side, three other different types of grant. One is community facilities, improvements to village halls and things like that. Then there's what are called decarbonised grants, so very specific grants that help adapt to climate change, and some other one that I can't read because my eyes have gone.
Decarbonised startup community.
Startup, yeah, business startups, so new businesses coming into the area as well. So, but that just shows you how that's... What I'm trying to do when I attend these meetings as well, it's the same when I go to the Staffordshire bit, is say, can you do one of these maps as well? And I can start to create a sense of what's happening in the whole of the national park for us. But I'm working on that, work in progress. But we'll start to get some images there. And that's where we are, is just to note, but obviously we can have a chat now.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for the presentation, Brian. And I think this is our opportunity as non-planning committee members to find out a little bit about what's going on beyond making planning decisions. And fabulous amount of progress in a wide range of areas. So thank you for the update, Brian. Members, it's comments, questions, debate. Is anyone anything to say? I'll go with James first, then Ken, then Simon.
Thank you, Brian. That's really interesting as ever, and good to see that it's done against the fabric of the management plan.
James, microphone.
Sorry.
Actually, I'll take mine.
Okay.
Yeah. No, Brian, really good, really interesting, and good to see it done against the backdrop of the management plan. Good progress, very good progress. I suspect, given the conversation we've had before about budget reductions, that some of this may have to be reviewed going forward, but I won't put you on the spot, but I think that's just a fact of life. Two very specific points, if I may. One is about the flexibility of policy. And I know I've raised this with you before, and you've told me that I'm wrong, and I am, I have no doubt. But when we're looking at business space, given the fact that there's an awful lot of new business space that's being created at Riverside, I'm not entirely sure why we turned down the proposition over the road for a hotel when there's ample business space. Now, when the policy was made, then I understand entirely because there wasn't the business space down at Riverside, but now there is. So it's a question of flexibility in that regard. That's one point I wanted to make. And the other was the former government's Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, I think it was called, when they were talking about the regeneration, with the registration of holiday homes and its impact on thriving communities in particular, and the notion that there were to be new powers given to planning authorities to have a say in the unprecedented growth in holiday homes and holiday lets in particular. And I wonder if that's run into the sand. So one is about flexibility of policy based on changing circumstances, and the other is really just to see whether that's ever going to progress or not. Thank you.
So, okay, yeah, so on the policy flexibility side, so that site is one of a set of named safeguarded spaces across the national park, because obviously we don't have a lot of business space compared to other areas. So Bakewell, yes, has got some supply, but not many others like that. So actually across the park it becomes quite a finite resource. So that was the policy intent behind it. It's important strategically. And it sort of says, you know, these are set aside for B1, B2 type uses rather than holiday. It's a debate to be had, you know, and actually it's an appeal. We might lose the appeal. It's we're about to, you know, hear the result of that. So, so that will be interesting to see that one and just how the inspector regards that strategic approach. Derbyshire Dales District Council objected to that scheme as well. So locally, from an economic development perspective, they saw the value in maintaining it for B1 space rather than holiday. So yeah, it's a good debate, because actually some of those, if it's the right kind of development, can deliver jobs as well. Obviously, depending on the type, if it's an apart hotel, as this was described as, sometimes you might just get a porter at the bottom, but not many others. So people kind of come and they kind of live in it, less like a hotel room, but it's actually, you bring your own food, you kind of, you know, you look after yourself more. So actually, the job creation on that site was very small.
I didn't want to be specific.
Yeah.
An
But-
issue around flexibility.
Yeah, but I think it's, you know, as those sites get used up, and that particular site is actually saying, you know, they think this is a good option. So let's see what the appeal says. On the other, I have actually been trying to tune into Hansard debates in a kind of geeky way to see what the government are actually saying about these things. The registration scheme is progressing. So there's two things we mentioned there. One is actually registering them, which is actually giving local authorities better data on what's happening to these changes. So that was mentioned very strongly as an initiative that's about to happen. The second one, I think has gone a bit quiet, actually. The new government haven't been talking about this one. They've been talking about building new homes. I think the Peak District with Derbyshire Dale sent a joint letter on this. South Lakes and the Lake District councils sent specific representations on it. There are some really hotspot areas across the country where that is meaningful. And I think that debate's got a bit lost. I have seen some MPs raising it again in the Hansard, you know, parliamentary debates, and the government have promised to look at it again. You know, so it's not gone away completely, but it clearly wasn't on the radar in the way that it was a year or so ago. So I think, you know, we've already written that letter, we've already made the point in some respects, but whether there's other kind of political interventions can be made, it's important that the problem is still there. So that's where we are with those.
Thank you, James. Ken R.
Yeah, I mean, 2 points. This one was the second one first. I just on the radio this morning, putting up to an Edinburgh on the tourist tax. I don't know if there was people in the Peak District. I don't know. That's maybe for the government side. It's just Scottish, as was alluded to earlier. You know, different administration, different government. In terms of housing, there's lots of pressures. You know, I mean, Stockport have pulled out of the Homes for Everyone. So now the builders not building anywhere, and obviously as was alluded to, like Chesterfield, Sheffield, places like that, they could, you know, the pressures will be there to build. I really welcome the idea that it's brownfield. And for us to know like that creamery, that was great, and that one we looked at, I think that will enhance the environment and, you know, provide homes, particularly for local people. But I just wondered, you know, going to the future, you know, what powers do we have? I mean, in my authority in Oldham, it all kicked off big style at the meeting had to be abandoned and the police called, and the Conservative group leader was scuffling. He's now resigned, he's on the saddle of the councillors. It's not the national thing. But it's all over this issue of building houses. I think it's going to come back eventually to council. But my specific question is, you know, would the Peak District, we don't really want people building everywhere with these pressures, because what we're here for is to preserve. You know, as I was driving in this morning, that dreadful journey, I just noticed as I crossed the boat with the boundaries, a lot of houses, as soon as you cross the boundary with that big storm, it's nice, there's fields, and it's not just, I just wondered, is there any chance that you know, hopefully that won't change in the future. Not for us now, but for the future generations.
Yeah, I mean, we tried to explain this, I think, to the member steering group last week, and it's complicated from a evidence point of view. You have to show that you've understood the needs of the area. You actually have to go through the same methodology, in effect, that everywhere has. But then national planning policy, and as well as our purposes, the national planning policy says the scale and extent of development in national parks should be limited. And we obviously have to conserve and enhance our special qualities. So we've kind of got to go through the hoop a little bit first to understand what the scale of the problem is, but then we can go further, in effect, in understanding what the constraints are of this area. And that will be because of green spaces and because of the setting of heritage buildings and everything that is important to the character of the Rural National Park. We'll also have to try and find some reasonable space as well to respond to some of the issues that we have got. So that will come out, I think, in the next part of the plan. But I think we have got the power and the legislative framework to constrain that more than other areas, so relatively less. What we're also talking about with like adjoining areas is that, well, when you've got part of your area in a protected landscape and then part of that becomes the setting to that landscape, that should put a constraint on you as well. So I think that people like the Dales and Highby are quite interested in the way that we work together to understand how that relative growth grades out a little bit. We haven't really got strict buffer zones in these wider areas, but we have got green belt and we have got a setting to a national park, and that can be taken into account. The other big thing that government are talking about is bringing back strategic planning. Regional planning was there before. The combined mayoral authorities are actually well placed to bring that back at one level, and that would allow us to think a bit holistically. Going back to about 2010, there was an East Midlands regional plan, and it had an area in it called the Peak Sub-Area. It wasn't just the National Park, but it was the National Park plus the rest of Derbyshire Dales and the rest of High Peak. And the whole of that area in spatial planning terms was described as a more constrained area. So there's other space, I think, for the planning debate to think about these wider landscapes, not just the National Park. But I think there's clearly a strong political mandate to up the delivery. So it's not just about policy, it'll be about funding, it'll be about, you know, affordable housing programs to do that. Maybe CPO, you know, how do you get hold of the land to do it? You know, how do you actually deliver? So there's lots in it, but yeah, I think we have got a point of difference there, certainly, to be able to constrain that. Got Simon at the back as well. I don't know if there's a
Simon, do you
related
want to
point.
comment?
Just to add in,
Do you need to come forward onto a mic, please?
Red light, got it. One of the things that also came out of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act was the thing called the duty to seek to further, which we're waiting. There are a couple of test cases running across the network at the moment, and that could be quite an interesting thing, coming back to what you were saying, Ken, about what controls we might have in terms of what goes into the management plan, how the management plan links up to the development documents, and what we can do within that. But it remains to be seen how the duty to seek to further actually works out in practicality.
Okay, thank you. Brian, I won't expect you to talk about the tourist tax because it's outside the scope of this paper, but we could have a long chat about the opportunities there. Yeah, good. Excellent. Can we move on to Simon, please, now?
thanks, Chair. Brian, it's a really interesting report. Just a question about how representative the responses are to the public consultation on the local plans, because you've got 226 responses, 178 attendees at the various events, so that's an average of 8 per village, or 10 per village. But they're probably the same people as well. There's probably significant overlap between the people who attended and the people who responded. And you've probably got 30 responses from members of this authority, so you're talking about a tiny, tiny number of people. My recollection is there was nothing in the web space you filled out about the person who was responding. There was no means of identifying any characteristics, age, whether they were farming, there was nothing there that would guide you towards the representativeness of the sample that you've got. And if this map that you're showing, which is very interesting, the parishes map where you've coloured some of the parishes, sort of green colour, teal colour, those presumably the ones where we've got responses, are they?
Sorry. Yeah, I might.
Simon, can you turn your mic off?
That's it. Yeah, sorry if I might have confused things with that. No, the map, I think there's a little note at the bottom, but it's actually taken from the local plan. So that one shows you parishes which include a settlement which are named in the local plan. So it's actually, if you look at the white areas, are more likely to be sparse, unpopulated areas. Yeah. So no, it's not an attempt to show who's responded to the plan. It's more of a spatial planning tool, really.
Sorry, that's my misunderstanding. It actually makes it worse. So in other words, we don't even know actually where these responses are coming from. We may have clusters of responses coming from, say, Bakewell, and nothing at all from some of the more rural ones.
Yeah, within the information we've got, we'll know if it's come from a parish council or a local council, those kind of things. Through our platform, through our consultation platform, where people have inputted, we'll know, because we've got email addresses and we've got contact details for people within the system.
So, Charles, do you want to add to something there? Can you have your mic on, please?
Sorry, is Simon referring to the feedback that came from the
Local plan.
parish day?
No,
Is that?
No, I'm referring to the public consultation.
local plan.
Okay.
And I'm just trying to understand how representative the responses that we've received are. Because I think there's a real chance that we've got a group of activists, nothing wrong with that, but we don't actually know anything about the demographics of the people who have responded.
Yeah. I think we certainly know that parishes have responded. They're given a statutory role to respond, so we do know that. But that they're given a role to represent the communities. But I agree. I mean, it's a perennial problem about how you get out there and go further with engagement. And we've actually increased the amount from previous times with this system. But
So, do we know whether there are other groups, environmental NGOs and people like that, responding as institutions or organisations, or are they?
yeah, we'll know who they represent. Yeah. Maybe that hasn't come across in the what you filled out. But
I agree. If it's coming from an organisation, then we will know the identity of that organisation. But the individual responses, which actually in many respects are more important because they're not special issue respondents. They are people who live in the park. We have no idea where they come from, what their demographics are, or anything about them, which is slightly unhelpful when we're developing other.
Yeah. Thank you. Phil, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I sort of picked up a similar thing when I was at Parishers Day, where, from memory, I think we were discussing the tier. I was in the working group that was discussing the tiers of the villages, what have you. And those people who are in that room, very kind of invested in how their village was categorised, but not the people who live in that village. 99% of the people living in that village weren't there, weren't taking part in that. What I asked Adele at the time, I said, do we have to take all the comments that are coming and kind of almost like, a vote, a popularity, the comments that get the most, do we have to then adopt them? Or can we say, even though almost everyone commenting has said X, we don't agree with X because, we don't think that. And she said, we can make our own decisions up. We listen through this. And I just think that will partly address your point about a lack of diversity of comments coming forward. So there'll be a few voices that are very loud. Do we have to listen to them because they're very loud? And I think the answer is no. We don't have to make our decisions based on that.
Okay.
we actually did say to the parish planning training group this week, it's the nature of petitions. You could get a petition with 500 names on it saying one thing and one person saying the other. And if that's got more material weight to it in planning terms, that's the important one.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is you have to listen to them, but you don't have to agree with them. Thank you. Just to clarify. No, I've just said that's to reply to that. Any other questions, Charles?
Yeah, so there's two bits for me. One is the engagement with the parishes. So there's always the pushback about representation and listening, but the attendances at some of the parish meetings are limited, can we say? So it's great to see that the planning training has attracted a few more people, and I think maybe there is that bit there of looking at other aspects of training, not just within planning, but other aspects of training, discussion, engagement, where maybe we can get a bit more input from parishes. But I suspect one of the things is that planning training will have worked well both ways, in terms of perhaps planning officers helping some of the parish councillors to maybe understand some of the key issues and considerations and what's material and what isn't. And equally for the parish councils, just to be a bit clearer on how a planning authority works. So I'm really happy with that. And I do wonder whether or not there's scope to maybe do that in other areas as well. And then the second part is actually in relation to all the housing figures. So Ken had touched on it, but I think my concern is that if you think about the Buxton and how that kind of like projects into the park, whilst the park itself is protected, and whilst you might have there'll be that bit of protecting the edge of the park as well. If we see a lot of development around the fringe of the park, that'll put a lot of other kind of pressures on there, and it kind of depends upon those settlements and what's what. But that could be increased vehicle movements for work. It could be where doctors, dentists, supermarkets are. I think it is one of those of, whilst I appreciate the neighbouring authorities, neighbouring planned authorities need to work together and cooperate, some of those neighbours are going to be under tremendous pressure to find sites, and the danger for us perhaps is that where maybe in previous years they would have shied away from a particular site because of the proximity to the park, maybe that now they're going to have to put that forward, and that's going to be challenging because having been in a situation where I was trying to get some sites removed from the plan, the throwback to me was, well, there's your marker pen, sunshine. You tell me where they're going to go. And there's a lot. It's quite easy to say not there. It's not quite so easy to figure out where else you're going to put them. I think there's just that bit of concern that we might see things coming forward in neighbours' local plans that are a bit of a concern for us. But what the options are with these increased numbers could be really limited.
Thank you, Charles. So, thoughts, Brian? I don't think there was a question on there, but I'd like your sort of thoughts on Charles's comments.
Yeah, firstly, the parish's training. I mean, they've certainly asked for more of that, and they've asked us just to consider, our resourcing to be able to do that. When you said in other areas, do you mean other topics or other parts of the park potentially? Yeah. So we should think about that and whether we can access other audiences. So that's a good point. Interestingly, when we've had discussions with the likes of the Dales on the housing numbers question, it isn't just a landscape and sites problem. It's actually those wider points about what will this do to the balance of these populations. Will there be the jobs and services for these houses? It isn't just houses, is it? It's actually about whole communities and the sustainability of it all. So I think that applies generally. And the other point that we've made, when there's been expansion closer to the park edge, is on the added recreational impact that creates and the pressure to our sensitive sites. So I think we'll be picking up a range of pressures from there. But I certainly understand what these districts will have to do. They'll have to release, they'll have to look at expansion in certain areas. I've been out on site with colleagues before on the pass between kind of Glossop over to Longdendale, looking back towards where the edge of Old Glossop is and thinking, how far can you go? And that's going to keep creeping out, into that landscape. And those will be the kind of areas that I think we'll see. Yeah.
Sorry, Ken, sorry, thank you. Right, thank you. Can you put your mic on, please? Thank you, yes.
Thanks,
yeah.
sorry, I'm pressing the button, I'm not working. Just on that same point, I mean, one of the issues is there just isn't enough brownfield sites. And, I've seen, particularly on all that road coming out of Glossop that you go up there, and I can from the seats, it's obviously almost inevitably going to impinge into the national park, and you can see as it goes round all the way down. And then the other one, even as, probably not as far as Sparrow Pit, but what's the name of that place that goes down into Stockport, named Maple, and the one... I always find it bizarre when you go down there to the bottom, there's a church there, at the bottom, there's a Roman Catholic church, and it says Diocese of Nottingham. So it shows how far, and you're only about 5 miles from all the things in the centre of Manchester, the boundaries themselves. I mean, just another point, really. Local government, I was just talking to my colleague earlier from Cheshire East. There is talk of those top places. You think of like the Peak District, and then over to Cheshire, and maybe Derbyshire as a whole, you know, would maybe go in and, I mean, I doubt that would have any effect on the national park. But it makes more sense. If you get knocked down in Glossop, they take you to Thameside General Hospital. You know, so that all the people who live in there, that they might, you know, go back to 74, expand them. I don't know if there's any thoughts of that. Maybe the same with Sheffield. And what he was saying, maybe that, like he was saying his home council was a basket case, but unfortunately, but they, you know, but they've gone to Cheshire East, Cheshire West. There's talk of Derbyshire having 2 councils. But my question is, would all this have any impact on the national park?
Yes, I think it would, you know, in landscape setting and those issues about recreational impact. And some political pressures by districts to say you need to take some of this as well, you know, and that all comes to us. We've just got to be our own independent National Park Authority and take our own view on that, really. And I think, accept what I've been trying to do through the Thriving Communities work is accept that we have a need for thriving communities as well, but at the right scale, you know, and small sites can make a big difference to some of our communities. I think we just need to get the pipeline of the right kind of sites coming forward in partnership with the money, etc. And that's reasonable, you know, I think.
Thank you, Aaron. I think we've all had a long I think we've had a long morning, and it's already past 1 p.m. and we've hardly had a break with the 2 meetings. Unless it's a burning question, Ken, I'd really like to. No, it's not.
It's just, yeah, so the border over there, they're all mourning that there's a lot of people who come down from the city of Manchester and they're now the minority. That's maybe the future. But, you know, the population, people have got to live somewhere.
Thank you.
I'll stop
Yeah.
there.
Thank you. Can we have a recommendation here? Our recommendation is to note. And so have I got a mover for this recommendation? Ruth, thank you. Seconder, Ken Smith. All in favour of this recommendation? Thank you. And anyone against? Any abstentions? Thank you ever so much. And Brian, thank you very much for bringing this paper for us today. I think it really does help us sort of get behind the things that are happening in relation to sustainable communities beyond just the planning functions. So thank you ever so much. And thank you Programmes and Resources Committee members for the conversation today and the meeting.